Good day to all. Thank you for joining us today. I am Glenn Renfro. I am one of the developers at Pivotal. Currently, I'm working on Spring XD, and if you haven't had a chance to hear about what Spring XD is, I'm going to read the bio on it here, but it's a unified, distributed, and extensible system for data ingestion, real-time analytics, batch processing, and data export. Really what it does, it just simplifies your life when you're having to build big data applications. So what does that have to do with Spring integration and Spring Boot? In short, Spring XD is built, two of its primary components are Spring integration and Spring Boot. And that's what kind of was brought out this kind of discussion. The reason I wanted to talk about it to you guys today is I think these two work together extremely well, and how Boot is able to pull in all the, in this case, just the entire Spring framework together and allow you to implement these smoothly. We're going to talk in a little bit more about how Spring Boot does that, but if in our discussion today, we're going to be using, of course, Spring Boot. We're going to be using Spring integration, and we're actually going to have a little bit of the Spring Web in there. So all these components will be put together, but with very little coding involved. It's really done through mostly annotations. Some of the things that I also wanted to kind of discuss with you as well is coming from working with several companies in Atlanta over the past few years. I know that there's a lot of people out there that already have a lot of code that they've written. They've already used the XML. So there's going to be kind of two components to our workshop today, or I should say our discussion. One is that I'm going to just show you the new goodness that you get with like the Spring Integration 4.0, the new Spring Boot 1.1 that just came out last week. But also I'm also going to show you like, how do you do this with XML? How do I put this stuff together? So if you already have an existing app, we're going to show you how to utilize these new tools to take advantage of them. But if you're creating that brand new application, you can certainly take advantage of just the new features that, again, like we talked about 1.1 for Boot and Spring Integration 4.0. So kind of bridging this gap, one of the things that also I've been working with, I'm pretty active in the Atlanta community. If you haven't figured out, I live in Atlanta. I've talked with several of the companies through our Java users group and our Spring users group, and I just like talking to people saying, hey, what are you doing out there? What's cool? And what I'm seeing is a lot of companies are starting to build applications that are taking in and receiving information from devices. So I'm going to go ahead and give you this very, very, very old image, but I still think it's really right on the money. It comes from the MQTT org site, and that is that what we're seeing is I'm going to say it, and please don't hate me for saying it, the concept of Internet of Things. It used to be, it was person to machine, now it's machine to machine communications that are occurring. One of the companies I talk to is a company that implements the devices that you buy from your insurance company, or your insurance company gets to you, you plug into your car, and that device that tracks how well you're driving. So another company I think is a big beverage company, and what they do is they have refrigerators that they deploy to all the stores and markets throughout the world. And in each of these devices, they remotely communicate back to the host or to the host company the compressor speed of that refrigerator. So what's important about that? Of course, we can think about the maintenance that the compressor can send out an error saying, hey, I'm not working well. But also, based on how the compressor is working, they can tell if that machine needs to be refilled. So these devices send back messages back to the home using MQTT, stating, hey, I need to be refilled, they know it by the compressor. Hey, I need to be repaired or replaced. But also, if the machine starts up in a new location because it has a GPS in it, they know, oops, I think our machine may have been stolen, so they can call law enforcement. So just the way that these guys are utilizing these instruments, medical is another. There's another company. I can't really talk about what they're doing, but it's really cool how they're doing what they're doing, utilizing MQTT. So I've said that word about 5 times, or that acronym, and basically it stands for MQ for telemetry transport. And really it is a very small, lightweight transport. It's pretty much meant for applications or in devices where bandwidth and battery power at a premium. So that's the reason why we have this MQTT, and that's the reason why I wanted to have that kind of discussion around it today. So the device I wanted us to play with has not arrived yet. Even though they have the API available for me, I wanted to have the device. And so I said, well, I can't talk about it yet because it's another project, but there's a device that I'll be receiving, and hopefully if I give this presentation again, I'll be able to talk a little bit more to it. So I said, well, I want this to be a kind of a cool, jazzy discussion. So one of the things that I'd like to do when I do discussions like this is to say what's kind of in the news a lot and how can I implement that to kind of keep our interest. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to create an application, actually 2 apps. Both are going to be Spring Boot apps. Both are going to have Spring integration involved. And one is going to go out and poll 2 Bitcoin, a Bitcoin bank and a Bitcoin trading floor, and get the current bid price for a Bitcoin to US dollar. And this is not a mining operation, so that's a whole different discussion. But certainly, I think I want to kind of, like I said, kind of enjoy something in the news that's kind of interesting, and let us kind of take a look at that as our kind of our use case demo. So today what we're going to be doing is utilizing Spring Boot. I think Spring Boot's really cool in a couple of things. It takes an opinionated view of building a production-ready Spring app. It does favor convention over configuration. And for you experienced Spring guys out there, if you're kind of new to Spring, it's fantastic. It allows you to bring up Spring your app quickly. You don't have to quite worry about all the, do I need this? Do I need to pull that in? It does all that for you. If you're experienced with Spring, you'll still get that goodness of being able to generate apps fast because you don't have to go in and do all that boilerplate code. But in my experience, when I first did it, I had what I call the 2 hours of scratching my head, like, why do they do this? Why do they do that? Be patient. After you get past that 2 hours, you're like, oh man, now I get it. This is actually pretty cool. This is going to save me a lot of time. So, it gives you that that opinionated view, but it makes sense because it's based on just years of experience from our developers here at Spring and Pivotal, but also from you guys out there that are using it every day. There's another question I get a lot, and what's the difference between Spring Roo and Spring Boot? Roo was a true code generator. You said you had to go in and answer a bunch of questions, and it would just generate a ton of code for you. Spring Boot doesn't do that. It just simplifies your configuration to such a degree and provides you the tools necessary as you need them, so you don't necessarily build up all this code. You create annotations, and you annotate the code that you need, and it will go and do the rest for you. So again, really simplifies your model, really simplifies how much you have to write. And so I think that's just the biggest advantage. And as they already say, you don't have to do any XML with Spring Boot. Okay? That's just the fantastic news of this. Okay? Second big component that we have is Spring integration. Now with Spring integration, it's been out there for a long time, so it's really tried and true. Mark Fisher created it. Gary Russell and Artem are the two guys primarily working on it now. These guys are fantastic. And what this does is, or what Spring integration is it gives you that programming model to implement enterprise integration patterns. If you haven't picked up the book, it's just a big black book. It's been out there since like 2006 or 2007, maybe even a little bit earlier than that. And it goes in and basically all these patterns that we've written over the series of years in our apps and our code, it's taken those, put the good ones in, and place them in this solid book. And what Spring integration does is it says, okay, we're going to allow you to use these patterns without having to write a lot of code. It's all this configuration that you can use and not have to write the code to implement those patterns, but rather just instantiate beans, create your flow between the beans, and proceed on to actually, creating your application. And we'll kind of show that today as well. With that, you get a lot of good adapters with it so that you can hook into other applications in the rest of the world. So, for example, today we're going to be writing our first app, the one that's going to go out and retrieve the data from the Bitcoin markets that we talked about. It's going to it's going to retrieve this data from using the REST HTTP adapter. It's going to then translate that data, and then it's going to emit that data out. Initially, we're going to take two steps. We're going to write first a file just to make sure we coded it right and the world is happy. But then we're going to, without any code change, just change one configuration, and we're going to output that data to MQTT. So that's how easy it is. But some of the other adapters you get, if you're doing SFTP, FTP, Rabbitmq, JMS, TCP, goodness gracious, I'm trying to remember some of the others that you have out there. All these are prepackaged for you. Some of the other things that you get as well is translators out of the box. So we have several translators that, of common formats that you're trying to do, like maybe JSON to object and so on and so forth like that, or back and forth. We already have some of those built in for you. The other thing that Spring integration gives you is the ability to go in and provide decision tracks for your code. So, for example, based on the payload or something you place in the header, what it will do is you can actually tell it, I want to route this data from position for, let's go to the medical device. I'm making this part up. There's a maintenance message. Okay, I want to route all messages with a header maintenance. I want to send it off to maybe just store into a database. But maybe if it's an alert saying, oh, wait a minute, this patient's in trouble, I want to route that to the pager service or to the cell phone service so that they can alert the appropriate medical staff that the patient's in trouble. So there's all sorts of things here that you can utilize that are available with out-of-the-box or Spring integration. So today we've kind of started covering this a little bit. We're going to create two apps. One is going to be just a Spring integration message pump. It's going to retrieve that data and output that data. And so it's going to be pretty thin, but you're going to see just a few lines of very little code. Actually, I think I put too much code in there because I wanted to write my own transformer to kind of show you how that would look. But other than that, it's not much there. It's just configuration. So we're going to, like I said, we're going to gather that data from those Bitcoin from a couple of one market, one bank. We're going to translate that. We're going to send it out to MQTT. Then the second app we're going to create, again, it's going to be a Spring Boot, Spring integration app, but it's also going to be built on using what we're going to call the Starter Web POM. You'll hear a little bit more about that in a second. And it's going to be able to retrieve these MQTT messages that we sent out. We're going to report that data to console, what we received, and then we're going to count the total of messages received. And then we're going to allow you to view that via browser. But then what we're also going to do is I'm going to take a couple other steps after that to show you some of the boot goodness that you get just out of the box with adding nothing more than what we call that, again, that POM starter or something that's already available just out of the gate. So, again, this is our graphical representation of what we just talked about. There's going to be Coinbase and Bitstamp are going to be the two. Coinbase is the bank, Bitstamp is the market. We're going to transform that data we receive them into a common format, output it to MQTT adapter. It's going to be sending it to a Rabbit broker. Once received by the Rabbit broker, our inbound, MQT inbound from our MQTT monitor is going to pick that up, and it's going to send it to the endpoint, where that endpoint is going to do, of course, the recording of the receipt of the message and uptick that counter. So, let's go ahead and talk about the tools that we're going to be using today. I say your favorite editor. Today I'm going to use Spring STS, tried and true, been up there for years. But that's what we're going to be using today. The build tool is going to be Gradle, but I'll show you briefly how easy it is to look at. Even though you'll see Gradle examples, I'm going to show you a quick website where it says, oh, if you want to do a Gradle, look at it this way. But if you want to use Spring Boot for a Maven, you just click you click a token, and it'll show you the difference between the two. It's pretty nice. It's out on spring.io. We're also going to be using Rabbitmq for our broker. You can use any broker that supports MQTT. I'm happening to use the latest release of Rabbitmq, which already has the MQTT plugin as a part of it. But the key is if you're using an older version of Rabbitmq and you don't want to upgrade, it did not include the MQTT plugin out of the box, but they have instructions on how to add the MQTT plugin very quickly. And so I've done both, and I just want to let you know about that. Again, the libraries we're going to be using is primarily Spring Boot, Spring Integration, and like I said, I put a little bit of coding in here just because I like it, and that is I included some Jackson in there so that I can go ahead and do some JSON translation for us, or serialization, or so to say marshalling, unmarshalling. So, I'm going to start off, so we're going to go ahead and start writing our Spring Integration app right now, which is going to go out and retrieve the data from the banks and the markets. But I wanted to kind of show you a couple of things here. So the bike with the training wheels is for me to say, first we're going to output the data to the file versus going directly to MQTT, just so that make sure I got all the flow going and it's right. The big salesy looking 4.0 moniker says, in these places, I'm starting to use some of the Spring Integration 4.0 goodness. You'll see some of that in our main application. You'll also see that in what we call our Bitstamp HTTP outbound gateway. So with all that being said, let's go do some coding. And first, I'm going to move this guy out of the way. Sorry about the delay there. And we're going to bring up our Spring SDS here. Okay, so the first thing I want to show you is that we already talked about is I'm going to go ahead and bring up our build.gradle right here. And here's the first bit of goodness that you get is we're using Spring Integration, Spring Boot, which has all the Spring Framework stuff that we need necessary to create a Spring app. And all we have to do is include about 2 or 3 components. The first thing we're going to include is the plugin for Spring Boot. So we have our dependency here to go out and grab the Spring Boot Gradle plugin, and we apply the plugin. And it's been out, like I said, just came out last week. Once we've done that, we go look at directly at our dependencies. And the first dependency you see is a Spring Boot starter integration. What is that? And that's what's basically they call a starter POM. And it's like a one-stop shop for all Spring and related technologies you need without having to go hunt through sample code or find all the dependency descriptors that you need to put in this case, the Spring integration or the components necessary for that. Now, again, that's an opinion. So basically, Dave Sire and Mark said, what are the components that we need in order to create this, just your normal everyday Spring integration? And they got them all, except, in our case, they did not think that MQTT was should be really a part. It's not a common thing that most people use for that starter. So we actually had to go in and add that ourselves. But if you look at the code that you would normally have to write to include all those components, or say all the code, but all the dependencies, we shrunk all that down into one. And all we had to do was add an additional one. So that's how they've simplified it. And the only other thing that we had to our dependency, or added to our dependency, is the Jackson. And that's it. So that's what's really cool about this. We've started, not only have we simplified the coding, we've simplified the build process as well. So those are the things that will save you just a lot of time and trouble down the line. So we've looked at our build.gradle. And what we're going to do now is we're going to set up our main. So with our main, there's a couple things that we want to do. Is the first thing we want to do is we want to do a component scan. We want to find all the components that we need. You know what? Before I do that, make sure I spelled that right. Let's go look at our integration XML. So if you've been working with Spring for a while, this is nothing new. This is just a normal XML file for configuring all of our beans and things that we need. But I want to kind of show you the data flow that we're going to start off with. Remember, we're going to be taking data in from two different sources, one from Coinbase and the other from Bitstamp. So I said, well, what I want to do is show you how we do it both ways. So in this case, let's take a look at how we're going to gather the data from Coinbase. It's going to be all, except for the transformers, all going to be written in just XML. So nothing new here. Don't fall asleep on me. It's kind of important. Some of the things we'll cover. And the first thing is we're going to have our polar. And this guy's going to check and fire once every 5 seconds. It's going to emit an empty expression. And it's just going to send a message to our Coinbase gateway once every 5 seconds to say, hey, wake up. And I want you to do whatever you're going to do. In this case, the Coinbase gateway is going to go out and it's going to poll this site, make a RESTful call, retrieve the RESTful data. It's going to say that we're expecting result type of string, character set of UTF-8. And what we're going to do is we're going to take that data and we're going to send it to our transform channel. So now we've retrieved, so now what we've created is something of once every 5 seconds. It's going to go, it's going to make a call, it's going to retrieve data from our Coinbase. And then what it's going to do, let's take a look for our transform here. It's going to send that, the data is going to be sent to the transform channel. That transform channel is going to, in turn, send it to our transformer. The transformer is very basic. It's going to take that data, it's going to put it into, first we're going to declare our object mapper, which is Jackson. It's going to take that data and put it into our raw data object. Our raw data object is pretty simple. It's nothing more than the provider, whether it's Bitstamp or Coinbase, or if you want to add more, you can. And the current bid for US dollar to Bitcoin, and the last bid, what was the last bid available. So, and then it's going to take that data and return it, that data, just a serialized version of that data, a raw object, and it's going to send it to our output channel, which goes to files. So let's go back to our integration. Again, we're just kind of handling it that way right now. And in turn, it's going to send it to a file outbound gateway, and this is just going to write that data out to a Bitcoin.txt file. So let's go back to our main. We started off there. So the first thing we did was we said we want to have component scan. We want to find all the components that are necessary to build our application. We're then going to go in and we're going to add enable integration. Now this is something that's brand new. And Spring provides, so what's enable integration is Spring provides a number of environment and built-in beans to support runtime enterprise integration patterns and messaging infrastructure. With the XML config, they're automatically declared as necessary by the namespace handlers, but if you're doing everything in pure Java, there's no way to do that unless you include this. So if we were not using the XML at all, we would have to put in this enable integration so that we could pull in all the stuff necessary for it. So if you're doing, while it's not necessary for us to do it here, I did include it just so that when you do write your code and you decide to write your data flows using EIP or Spring integration, you would know to use this if you're doing just a pure Java solution. So we made sure I spelled that enable integration correctly. Like we've already said, we are using a resource. We're going to make sure XML. There we go. And now, this again is a very simple application. So the thing that you're going to see me do here is you're going to see me not really use anything too bootish, but something just to say, look, this is just a message pump. It's going to retrieve data and translate data and output data. So I'm just going to create an annotation config application context for our main. There we go. And we'll make sure I spelled all that right. Okay, there we go. And now, so now we have completely set up our Coinbase data flow. So our Coinbase is set up, it's ready to send this data, translate it right to file. But let's see how we would do the same thing, but using just annotations. So the first thing we're going to do for our class, we're going to declare this as in that configuration. And we're going to go in, and we're going to create our polar. This is another Spring 4 addition. It used to be kind of tedious if you were using annotations to create a polar. They made this so much simpler. I wanted to go out and give Artem a hug when he did this. It made life a lot easier. So we're going to do this. Adapter. We'll create our inbound channel adapter. We're going to make it a value, if I can spell. And what we're going to say is it's going to emit to the bitstamp HTTP channel. And we're going to set it up to a polar. Now, again, if I could type. We're setting our messages per poll to 1. We only want one message per poll. And we're going to set it so that it will poll our bitstamp site once every 5 seconds. There we go. And in this case, what we've written, I know it's kind of chopped here. Sorry for the screen resolution. Best I could get. And that is we're creating an inbound channel adapter. It's going to poll once every 5 seconds. It's going to retrieve one message, and in that one message, it's just going to send out, in this case, just empty data. That's going to be sent to where? Well, let's go ahead and see where it's going to go to. We're going to go ahead and declare this a bean. And we're going to make it a service activator. And if you don't know what a service activator is, this indicates that this method is capable of handling message or message payload. So basically we're saying, you know, this is a guy that's going to actually take this message and do something with it. So here we go. We're going to create this service activator. Its input channel is going to be bitstamp HTTP, just like above. And what this guy is going to do, he's going to go in and he's going to poll bitstamp. He's going to take that data. We're expecting the string class. He's going to send it to the transform channel. We're going to go ahead and I just had here where it goes out and prints data out. Nothing new there. So what we've created so far is a Coinbase with a polar that's going to retrieve Coinbase data. Then we're going to have the bitstamp down here. It's going to go out and grab the data from bitstamp. So if I coded everything correctly and we go to here, we are going to go ahead and do a Gradle run. And if I messed anything up, you'll probably see me, and it doesn't work. as with any kind of demo, I have already pre-created the stuff that works, so we might just do a copy and paste if I made a mistake. But if I didn't, it should work perfectly. And I say mistake, meaning I fudge-fingered something or forgot something. So there we go. It's going out. It's going to start grabbing data. There it goes. So it's starting to grab data. I guess I should have also told you, I should have went in and I had already had a file out there, bitstamp.txt. I should have removed it. So it's probably going to show a little bit more data than it's supposed to. But we're going to go ahead and stop that for the moment. And we're going to go back to our, there we go. Oops. May have not had all the data I wanted. There we go. And we're going to go to, there we go. Need to refresh that. There we go. And we received that, see that we've actually received Coinbase data, we've received Bitstamp data, and we can see with the Bitstamp data, let me just zoom in on that a little bit. Let's go to the very end. Yeah. So let me go ahead and rerun that. I'm going to do this first. I want to give you really good data here. We're going to do RM, and we're going to get rid of bitcoin.txt. We're going to rerun that. That way we get you can see actually what you get from the run. And let's see, was there anything else I wanted to mention while we're here? Yeah, the one thing that you'll probably see as this thing runs is you're going to see where the data doesn't change that much. A couple of weeks ago, Bitcoin went through just a big buying spree. Everybody was buying it up in pretty much droves. And so there was a lot of activity. I was like, all right, we're going to show a lot of real data. Well, this past week, people have kind of quieted down. They're not buying quite as much. So the bids don't really change quite as much as they once were. Kind of disappointing because I wanted to have there we go. I want to have a little bit more change in it, but, well, we get what we get. So in this case, you see we have the Coinbase. You'll always see the Coinbase at the last is always null. That's because Coinbase does not provide us a last bid. But they certainly do tell us the current bid. In this case, is $606.97 for a current Bitcoin. But with Bitstamp, they will show you both the current bid and the last bid. In this case, it was $596.28 for the current and $599.74 for the last. And we go on, and we see that we're actually writing the data out to a file. So we talked about, all right, I've created my file adapter. How easy is it to add it to the MQTT? So let's go there real quick. And I am going to take us back out to the integration XML. And we're going to scroll down. And what we're going to see is what does it take for an MQTT to set it up. First, behind the scenes, the MQTT adapter is using the Paho client from mqtt.org. In this case, I'm using the username password guest, which are the defaults for Rabbit. So when you start, if you just take Rabbit out of the box and you're running it locally, you just can use guest. But for the outbound channel adapter, I'd used the client ID of guest. Doesn't matter what that is, but we use guest. I'm using a local instance of Rabbit. My default topic I'm going to be writing to is the xd.mqtt.test. We're using the factory we've enumerated above. The default QoS, this is a quality of service. This just tells us this is something that comes from the MQTT side that says if you set it to 0, it may or may not send the message. It says 0 to 1 sends. If you set it to 1, it says we're going to guarantee that we send this data at least once. Default retained is set to false. So when we're publishing, when it's default retained is set to true, that says, look, when I push the message, it's requesting that Rabbit hold that message. And anytime anybody subscribes to that xd.mqtt.test, that they'll actually get that message. It's guaranteed to get that message even after they sign on after the message was sent. But if you set defaults, it just means that if there's somebody subscribed to the channel, they'll get it. If they're not subscribed to the channel, the message is discarded. And lastly, we see that we're expecting to receive data from Spring integration from our input channel is MQTT out. So how do we hook it in? We'll go to our transform here, and we're going to set him. Instead of writing out and sending the data to our outbound file adapter, we're going to send it to our MQTT outbound adapter. So we're going to go ahead and change that to MQTT out. There we go. And once that is going, we'll go ahead and click off our Gradle run. And we're going to cheat a little bit here. And how do we know that it's receiving unless we have our client? I'm going to go ahead and bring up our Rabbitmq manager. And when we start receiving messages and pumping messages through, boom, 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 here we go. We've got some messages. We can actually go out to our Rabbitmq, and we should see some messages pop up there like we see here. So now we know that, in fact, with really just a bunch of annotations, which I think are easier, but if you're more of a traditionalist, you can certainly use the XML. But with just either a little bit of XML or some annotations, and you saw like the only code I really wrote was for the transformer, we've got an application that is receiving the data from these two sources, translating the common format, and writing it out to MQTT. And so we can see there's going to be messages going, and then you see the messages flowing in and out of Rabbitmq. So now let's go ahead and take our next step. So now we've written the guy that goes out, gets data, and is going to be pushing the data out. So that simulates our device. So now let's actually go in and write our application that's going to receive the data. So let's go there really quick. I got to pick up my pace. My apologies. Get kind of chatty. And we're going to go to our monitor here, and we're going to show you the main. And then the main is just a little bit of code, nothing there. We're going to show you how to build that up. But first, as we did before, you're going to see that I'm going to bring up the build.gradle. We start from where we get all, again, the goodness. In this case, this app is going to be a MVC app that's going to be deployed to a Tomcat server. And the Tomcat is going to be running embedded, so I don't have to create the WAR and deploy the WAR out to a Tomcat. This is going to start an embedded Tomcat. How does it do that? How much code do I have to write? How much do I have to put on my build.gradle or my Maven? So in this case, like we talked about before, we have our plugin, which is Spring Boot. And then from our Spring Boot, what are our dependencies? Again, I'll show you our common one here, which is the Spring Boot starter for integration. And then like we said before, they didn't think it was necessary to include the MQTT and just the starter for Spring integration, but to add it, it's just one line of additional line of compile. But to create a Spring MVC app, all we had to do is again use the starter. Pardon me, the Spring Boot starter for the web. And if you get a chance, I highly recommend going and look at the Spring Boot reference, which is just go to Spring.io and look up Spring Boot, and you can look up the references and some of the samples they have. But what I wanted to show you here is when you look at the starter, look at all the starters you get out of the box. If you're going to create an application that's going to need Gemfire, JPA, if you need to hook it into Mongo, Solar, JDBC, you don't have to do all this dependency pull-in work. It just, all you have to do is include the starter, and you already have the features ready to go. So highly recommend you take a look at that doc. Very well written. I'm going to go ahead and minimize that. So again, that's all I have to include for my build.gradle. Now, let's go back. And we're going to go ahead and leave that there for the moment. We're going to go back to our main. So let's go ahead and build up our app that's going to receive this data. And what we're going to do is I want to show you one other thing. We do have our resource here. I wanted to show you again. Here is our this is going to be our inbound adapter. It's going to be the one receiving the MQTT traffic. And it's going to be receiving it, looking again at the local Rabbit instance to retrieve the data. Topics. You can receive data from multiple topics. In this case, it's our XD MQTT test, but if you want to have other topics, it's a common delimited list of topics you want to receive data from. Send timeout, in our case, it's not necessary, but if I have like a blocking queue that I may be sending data to, that's one of the data structures that are provided to you by Spring integration, and that queue is blocked, we'll wait 123, or we'll wait this amount of time to receive that data, or wait to send that data there before we time out. the factory that we're using, and our outbound channel is going to be output. So let's go back, and we're going to go back to our main, and we're going to start building our main up to be able to receive the data and also be able to display that data. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to use a @controller annotation. We're going to say, and we're going to include what's called enable auto configuration. And this is an annotation that tells Spring Boot to kind of guess how you're going to work, how you want to configure the Spring based on your Dart dependencies that you have. So this guy's going to look in and try to guess what you're going to do. So here's some that, like we said, that opinionated goodness that they give us so we don't have to worry about that. We're going to, again, since we are going to be using that resource, we're going to do an import resource. There we go. And we're going to go ahead now and put in the driver that's going to start the whole application up. So here's our main. It's just pretty massive here. It takes a lot of time to code. And I'm saying that very teasingly. Spring application.run. And we're going to say main.class. And the args. There we go. What this guy is going to do is it's going to bootstrap our application. It's going to start Spring, and which in turn will start a auto-configured Tomcat web server. So by just adding this one line, I have now enabled us to deploy our app to an embedded Tomcat instance. So talk about one-stop shop. There you go. Now, what we're going to do is we need to be able to, so technically we've created a Java Spring Mvc app up and running in a Tomcat instance. But let's go ahead and be able to create a request mapping, because we won't be able to maybe see the data that we're receiving. And what we're going to do is set up our home, so that when we receive messages and we want to just display how many messages we receive, we can do so. And we're going to make this our response body. Actually, I don't have to do that. Okay. And now, so now we've created our app. We've created just a message endpoint for now, so we can actually, it's not a message endpoint, but an endpoint to display how many messages we received. And lastly, we'll create a service activator. There's an endpoint here for our Spring integration. And the input channel, like we saw before, is output. Okay. And we have now just created an application that's going to be able to start a Spring Mvc application that's going to allow us to see the counters or see the number of received through the browser, but also in turn be able to receive that data and update our counter and write that data to the console. So let's start our application running so it can receive messages. We'll go ahead and start our emitter so it can go ahead and start emitting emitting messages. It's going to take a minute. And again, if I budge finger or something, we can just do a copy and paste from the real thing that really works. Just make sure I didn't mess something up, because I know we're running a little bit shy on time here. But if I didn't misspell something, we should be ready to rock and roll. So there we go. And I messed something up. Application output. Let's go ahead and do Control-C. Output channel. Now, the one thing that I think I may have messed up here is I didn't save my main. There we go. Sorry about that, guys. Got so excited I forgot to save a file. And what we saw there was where I had not saved it recently, so when I had saved it, I did not have saved the service activator. And there we go. We see that we're now receiving messages. So what we've just done, guys, with next to no code, just really annotations and a little bit of XML, and we could have probably done it, and we could have done it all with just annotations, is to create an application, two applications, one that can gather data, emit MQTT traffic, and then another application that can receive it. Now, there's about two more things that I'm going to show you that just take another second or two. So one of the things that I wanted to show you is one of the things you get out of Spring Boot's goodness is the ability to, let me go find this right quick, and I apologize. There we go. I want to be able to, let's say, let's go back to our demo here. And what I want to be able to do is I see that I have a hard-coded message, the number of MQT messages received. What if I want to make that configurable? How would I do that? Well, typically you'd go in, place a property placeholder configurer, and set up a properties file, include the properties file, and allow it, and then put the annotations there. But they've kind of made that so much easier in Spring Boot. For me to do that, all I need to do is the following. Is I'm going to go ahead and take that out. I'm going to do that value, which is not Spring Boot, it's typical Spring, but I want to just show you the magic here. And what have I done? So I go ahead and set that up. So how do we get this data in there? So let's take a look, and we will see that a part of my project is a properties file called application.properties. So when your Spring Boot application starts up, it's going to look for an applications.yaml or an application.properties, and it's going to say, I'm going to take this data and I'm just going to load it in automatically. I'm just going to look for it, and if it's there, I'm going to go ahead and grab it and allow you to use it. I didn't have to write any code to do that. The only code I had to write was the annotation to say I want to be able to set up my display message to be the message we saw. So I guess what I should have done before was actually show you what it looked like before on the through the browser. So again, oops, got ahead of myself. So we can see from earlier today I was running it. Now I'm running it. There's nothing there because it's still booting up. Once we receive a couple of messages. There we go, just received 2. Now I hit refresh, and now we can see that it's using the new message. I should have showed you where it was using the old message, but I think you get the point. Now, what if I want to check the state of my application? How can I do that? Well, if I go in and I say I want to see what beans I deployed, I don't get anything. It doesn't work, right? But they have a service that they made available through called Actuator Service, which in turn allows you to create endpoints that allow you to monitor and interact with your application. How do we get this good monitoring in there? So we go back to our build.gradle right here. We're going to add the actuator. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to add another compile, right? And we're going to say org, spelling, Spring Framework, dot, boot, colon, Spring Boot, starter, dash. And we're going to call it actuator. So the actuator service is going to give us that feature that out of the box, if I include this starter, I can get certain statistics on my application through the browser. So let's see how that looks, or what that looks like. So if I go in and do another Gradle run, mind you, I didn't write any code. I just included the starter. Pardon me. And what you'll see, let me go back to the browser real quick. We'll go back to our main. That enable auto configuration is going to say, oh, he's using actuator. I guess he wants to actually, I see an actuator here. I want to go ahead and use that, allow him to use that. So here we go. Our app is running. we can go back to here, and we can see that we're receiving messages. There we go. See, we received 5 messages. But now I can actually go in and say, what beans have I used in order to deploy my application? I can get a list of beans. I can go in and say, what's the metrics of the machine? So maybe if I've deployed it to production, and I want to know what are the things that they've kind of set me up with, I can go in and say, all right, in production, I've been up for, 37 seconds. I've got 4 processors. Here's my memory free. I can go in and check the current memory. I can go in and see what my machine's doing at that time. I can also go in and do mappings and see all the endpoints that I have for my Spring app, which again is just this backslash. You can see all the endpoints that was provided by us by our actuator. We can also do a trace. So I can do a trace of my app. Then we can also do a dump, get a thread dump. There we go, just got a thread dump, and which of course is lengthy. And if you have it enabled, which I don't, you can do a shutdown, and I can actually shut down my application. Right now, since I have it out of the box, it's not enabled. But if, let's say, you're in development mode, you can actually go in and from a configuration, actually set up your application to shut down if you want it to. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and end that, and we're going to go back to our PowerPoint. And we're going to swap displays. Sorry about that. And that's it. So a little later today, or I should say next couple of days, I'm going to be posting this up to my local GitHub site. It's going to be Webcast Bitcoin. That's the guy that goes out and retrieves the data and sends it out. And I'm going to set up a GitHub for the Webcast MQTT that's going to be able to emit that data. And if you have any questions for me, you can certainly email me at grenfro@givepivotal.com.
And if you have questions, you can just enter them into the Q&A control panel of your WebEx, and Glenn will be able to answer them. So if you have any questions now is a good time. Let's see. So we'll give the audience a second. While we're giving people a moment to type, Glenn, one of the more common questions that we've heard developers ask about Boot is how does Boot allow you to configure logging? Could you talk about that for a minute?
Yes, sir, I sure can. And there's a couple of things that you can take advantage of. Out of the box, you get a kind of a default setup of logging, as you saw when we were running through it, that it will actually display that data. But let's say you want to have logback. You can use the logback starter, or you can use the log4j starter. So we have a couple of POMs or starter POMs already ready for you, depending on what kind you want to use. So again, it's just including the appropriate POM, starter POM. So that's a good question. Any others?
Fantastic. Thanks, Glenn.
No problem.
Let's see. One other one, just for the moment, is and this is very common as people start taking systems from development into production. How do you manage? How does Boot? Can you talk a little bit about how Boot manages profiles? How do you kind of
Excellent.
use Boot to sort of deal with the migration of environments from development, QA, staging, production, all that kind of stuff?
That's a good question. And basically, it uses the foundation profiles that comes with Spring. But the way that they do it, do you remember when in my application where I had the application dot properties, and like I say, you can application dot YAML. What you can do is you can actually set your environment so that you can either from one of those or from your directly from the environment, you can set your what's called the Spring profiles active, and you can enumerate the profiles that you want to active, and then what it will do is it will look for the application dash then the name of that profile. So, for example, if I had maybe production, I created application dash production dot YAML, application dot dash QA dot YAML. way I would use one of those or select it is I would set that environment variable to say, okay, I want to deploy, I want to set my environment variables to, or I should say, export Spring profiles active equal to QA, and then it will automatically load that applications-qa.yaml. So, very good question.
Great. Glenn, thanks. I don't think we have any questions from the audience at the moment. So,
okay.
But I'm going to just kind of finish up and do a little wrap up here. And if any questions come in the meantime, please, folks, feel free to ask Glenn anything on Spring integration and Boot. In the meantime, if you're queuing up any questions, what I just wanted to mention is that this webinar is being recorded, so we will be posting it, the replay, on YouTube and to our blog. So you can sign up to get the notification if you'd like to share the replay with your coworkers, or you think someone else in your team might benefit from the replay and this content. If you go to spring.io/video, you can subscribe to the YouTube channel, or if you go to spring.io/blog, you can sign up for the Atom feed there. And not only get notification about the webinar replays, but all the other great content, blog content from our engineering team. Spring 1 replays, blog entries, all that kind of stuff. And also, come back and join us on July 8th. Greg Turnquist is going to be talking how to build app management tools with Spring Boot, how to do things like monitor application logs using a lightweight Spring integration, Spring WebSocket Stomp app. Also, from the trenches, Casey Doolittle and Phil Dutson are going to talk on July 15th about a crazy project they got signed up for to create a shopping cart feature, basically for a enterprise site they were working on in 24 hours. So file that under War Stories and join us on July 15th if you're interested in that. On July 22nd, Michael Plude, a great speaker out at a lot of conferences, is going to be talking about the kind of business case and the technology case for Spring in Why Do I Recommend Spring? And on July 29th, we're going to be, Ross Danner from Crafter Software is going to be talking about content management with Spring and Groovy. So lots of great webinars coming up. Like I said, this webinar is being recorded. And if you do want to get downloads of the new Spring Integration 4.0 and Spring Boot, as Glenn mentioned before, you can definitely just plug in. You can grab the Maven and Gradle coordinates from our website. If for some reason you are looking for direct HTTP downloads, we don't really have those enabled on the website at the moment, because Maven and Gradle is just a far superior experience for the developer. However, if you desperately need an HTTP download of this stuff, you can find that at repo.spring.io. And there's a FAQ there on our Spring repository FAQ, so that you can get HTTP downloads there if you need it. Okay. Well, listen, thanks, everyone. I appreciate your time and attention. And Glenn, any closing comments before we sign off?
No, I think that's it. Thank you, Peter.
All right. Well, thank you for coming, and I hope to see you on a webinar again real soon, folks. Take care.